Gentlemen, imagine this. A man walks into a church. His hands are trembling. His wife sits beside him. Her eyes are lowered. A veil is covering her face. The same hands that once caressed her now shake with rage. He has caught her cheating. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And each time, the pastor says the same thing. Forgive, pray, read the word. But what happens when a man's spirit finally snaps? What happens when faith collides with human nature? And the church, which is meant to redeem, becomes the silent accomplice to a man's destruction. So, gentlemen, today I'm going to talk about the recycled virgin, the way the church packages promiscuity as purity. So, we look at the cycle of betrayal, and this story begins with a man who thought that he had found salvation in a church girl, the kind that sings in the choir, the kind that kneels at the altar with tears in her eyes, the kind that knows her favorite Bible verses by heart. Yet, beneath the modest dress and holy facade, she carried the habits of her past, a past that he tried to pray away. So, gentlemen, what we are going to look at is a phenomenon that many men have dealt with, particularly the nice guys, the beta males, the guys who go to church, the men who follow the rules. Okay? So 3 times this guy caught his wife cheating, and 3 times he sought counsel from the church, and 3 times the church gave him the same answer: forgive her. This, brothers, is where moral absolutism meets male naivety. The church often forgets that human behavior is patterned, not spontaneous. As Jordan Peterson tells us in 12 Rules for Life, you cannot negotiate with chaos. You must confront it. The church, in its overemphasis on grace, often enables chaos to flourish in the form of unrepentant deceit. That man was no longer battling his wife's sin. He was battling his own sanity. In his own words, he was considering homicide or suicide. I'm going to draw an analogy from Alcoholics Anonymous to illustrate a certain salient point here. In Alcoholics Anonymous, every meetings normally begin with a confession. Like one of them can say, "Hi, I am Daniel, and I'm an alcoholic." Okay? So this is not just a formality. It is a declaration of vigilance. They know that recovery begins with perpetual awareness. You don't stop being an alcoholic. You simply learn to live above it. That is why employers, they check your past record. It's because your past matters. They check your CV, they call your references. As Carl Jung observed in the Undiscovered Self, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. A person's past is not erased by good intentions. It must be integrated through awareness and accountability. So why is it that society demands accountability from men but not from women? Why must the male alcoholic forever be one drink away from relapse, but the promiscuous woman can be born again with a prayer and a white veil? So we look at a gynocentric double standard. Okay? They normally say that when they're referring to men who are abusive, once an abuser, always an abuser. But how come they don't say once a whore, always a whore? Feminist movements and gender-based violence activists repeat the mantra, once an abuser, always an abuser. They believe that men's pasts define them irrevocably. But when the same logic is applied to women, when one says once a promiscuous woman, always a promiscuous woman, suddenly it becomes misogyny. This is a double standard of our age. Okay? And it's part of the feminine imperative, a social order that is designed to prioritize women's interests, even at the expense of male reality. And the church, which should be the last refuge of truth, has become a sanctuary for this feminine absolution. So we look at the repackaging of the promiscuous woman. We've seen it in several parts of the world where slay queens, socialites, and former 304s, they repackage themselves. They go back to church. They say they have discovered Jesus. They even become prophetesses and they start performing miraculous feats. They heal the sick. They speak in tongues. And they are given all their attention. They are treated like the most holy people. So when the carousel stops spinning, when the pookies and the ray-rays have had their turn, and the thrill fades into loneliness, she returns to the church. She covers her head with a veil. She sings louder than anyone in the choir, and she becomes the model of piety. She speaks of secondary virginity and vows of chastity, hoping to scrub away the footprints of her past. But as any psychologist will tell you, unresolved behavioral conditioning does not disappear. It mutates. B.F. Skinner's work on operant conditioning reminds us that repeated reinforcement normally persists certain behaviors. So these behavioral patterns persist for long after the reward is gone. They don't just vanish. A woman who has spent several years trading intimacy for validation cannot simply pray it away. What the church calls deliverance, behavioral psychology calls denial. Yet she will demand a Proverbs 31 wedding, she'll want a white gown and all, while men who knew her in her past remember her very differently. Gentlemen, if you're enjoying this video, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it. When you subscribe, you'll always be notified when I drop new content. Also, when you like and share, you help this channel to grow, and more importantly, you help other men to discover the tools that they need to level up. So remember, when one man rises, we all rise. Now let's get back to the video. So we look at the beta male provider trap when forgiveness becomes a sentence. So enter this unsuspecting man, the churchgoer, the good guy, who sees her new faith as proof of change. He consults the pastor, and the pastor assures him that her sins have been forgiven. He believes her purity has been restored, but is walking into a psychological ambush. He's not marrying redemption. He's marrying repackaged dysfunction. Many such men, they end up with what the red pill thinkers call character development. Okay? Which are brutal life lessons administered by reality itself. They're the ones we say they collect dust. So the church, by ignoring the behavioral and psychological roots of promiscuity, they have failed men. The church preaches grace but forgets consequence. It blesses what it should be warning against. And as men normally may say, God may have forgiven you, but you are still at 3 or 4. So the red pill lesson here is that patterns don't lie. And that's why you're told you have to look at a woman's past if you want to know who a woman is. So modern women and feminists, they proclaim that once a cheater, always a cheater. They believe patterns define men. And this is fair enough. But if you accept that premise, it must cut both ways. Once a promiscuous woman, always a promiscuous woman. Because repentance does not erase conditioning. Faith does not overwrite psychology. As evolutionary psychologist David Bass tells us, human mating strategies are not moral choices. They are adaptive responses. So when the church sanctifies a woman's past, without understanding her adaptive psychology, it isn't saving her. It is recycling dysfunction and handing it to men wrapped in holiness. So, gentlemen, what is the truth over this redemption? Redemption is a beautiful ideal, but truth is a foundation of peace. Men must stop confusing holiness for transformation. A veil does not erase a pattern. A prayer does not rewire behavior. Forgiveness is divine, yes, but wisdom is masculine. So when the church says, forgive her, remember, Christ forgave the adulteress, but he also said, go and sin no more. The modern church, in its eagerness to appear merciful, forgot the second part. So before you fall for the rebranded Proverbs woman, in quotes, remember, some scars are not healed. They are hidden. And sometimes beneath the veil of redemption lies the same chaos that once destroyed another man. So get unplugged, and I'll see you guys on the next one.